Your Android phone is scanning right now, not because you asked it to, not because any app is open, not because, see, you are connected to anything, just quietly, constantly, invisibly, scanning, sending out signals, listening for responses, mapping every Wi-Fi network within range, cataloging every Bluetooth device nearby, building a picture of what who you are, what is around you, and how long you have been there. And the most disturbing part of all this is not that your phone is doing it. The most disturbing part is that this information is not staying on your phone. It is leaving. It is traveling. It is being received by parties you have never heard of, never agreed to share anything with, and who you will never be able to identify. And this is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented, peer-reviewed, published science. And it is happening right now on your device. In July of 2025, a team of researchers from IMDEA Networks, the University Carlos III of Madrid, and the University of Calgary published the first large-scale study ever conducted on how Android apps use your phone's wireless scanning capabilities to track your precise location with your knowledge. They examined nearly 10,000 apps. What they found should make every single Android user stop what they are doing and go directly into their settings. 86% of the apps they analyzed that contained wireless scanning code were collecting at least one type of sensitive personal data. Not GPS data, which has protections built around it. Wireless signal data, which has historically flown under the radar, exploiting a gap in Android's permission system that most users do not even know exists. And that gap has a name. It is called the Hidden Signal Scanner, and it is enabled by default on your phone right now. So let us talk about exactly what this is, how it works, what it is being used for, and most importantly, where to go in your settings to shut it down. Because the companies profiting from this data are counting on the fact that you will never look for it. Every Android device has a location system that most people understand on a surface level. You turn on location services, apps can see where you are, you turn it off, they cannot. That is the basic mental model most people operate with. But that model is dangerously incomplete. Because your phone does not rely solely on GPS to determine where you are. It uses a combination of signals, and two of the most powerful are Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Even when you have turned both of them off on your device, your Android phone can still be scanning for them in the background. There's a set of subsettings buried inside your location settings called Wi-Fi scanning and Bluetooth scanning, and they operate completely independently from your main Wi-Fi and Bluetooth toggles. Wi-Fi can have Wi-Fi switched off on your phone, and this scanner is still running. You can have Bluetooth switched off, and this scanner is still running. It is scanning the electromagnetic environment around you constantly, and it is doing this even when your screen is off and your phone is sitting in your pocket. The State Department's Rewards for Justice program, the same program that hunted down some of the most dangerous people on Earth over the last 3 decades, has now listed the senior leadership of the Islamic or Evolutionary Guard Corps as its primary targets. Up to $10 million for credible information on any one of them, relocation included. The United States is offering a new life to anyone brave, enough to turn on the people running the most powerful terror apparatus in the Middle East. The names on that list tell a story by themselves. Mojtaba Khamenei, the man who was installed as SUP, regime leader after his father was killed in the opening strikes of this war back in February. A man who, by every credible account, was also severely wounded in that same attack, burned, injured, hidden from the public since the moment Iran's ass and bly of experts voted him into the most powerful position in the country. Nobody has seen him speak publicly since. Nobody outside his inner circle claims to know exactly where he is. And yet, the United States is now making him the top name on a wanted list, which tells you something critical. Washington believes he is alive. Washington believes he matters. And Washington believes someone close to him can be flipped. Next on the list is Ali Asghar Hijazi, the deputy chief of STI. F to the supreme leader, the man who serves as the administrative backbone of the office, the one who earns the supreme leader's orders into directives that flow through the entire system. Below him, the Secretary of the Supreme Defense Council, the head of the supreme leader's military office, Yahya Rahim Safavi, a senior military advisor who has been inside the IRGC's orbit for over 4 decades, one of the original architects of the force. Iskandar Momeni, who runs Iran's interior ministry and its intelligence apparatus. These are not foot soldiers. These are the engineers of the machine. And then there is Ahmad Vahidi, the man who many analysts, many intelligence officials, and many people inside Iran believe is actually running the entire system right now. Not Mojtaba, not the clerics. Vahidi, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the man who, according to reporting from the Institute for the Study of War and American Intelligence Assessments, has made clear under wartime conditions that all critical leadership positions will be decided by the IRGC direct. T-lie. He forced the appointment of a new secretary of the Supreme National Security Council in March by sheer command pressure, overriding civilian objections. He effectively sidelined President Pezeshkian from any meaningful foreign policy role. HE is the one telling Parliament Speaker Galibaf and Foreign Minister Araghchi what they can and cannot say in negotiations. When Araghchi publicly announced the Strait of Hormuz would be reopened to commercial shipping, hardline commentators and IRGC-aligned state Madai turned on him instantly, making clear he had no authority to make that promise. That is Vahidi's shadow. That is the level of control he is exercising. And his name is now on a $10 million poster being distributed through encrypted channels to anyone inside Iran who wants to collect. Think about what that means for a moment. Every guard who stands outside Vahidi's location. Every driver who takes him from one underground facility to another. Every cook who knows which honker he ate dinner in last night. Every low-level IRGC operative who has ever been passed over for a promotion, who has watched his family suffer under the economic collapse, who has quietly stopped believing in the system. Every single one of those people knows that a single phone call could change their lives completely. $10 million, a new identity, a flight out. This is not just a financial offer. IT is a psychological operation aimed directly at the trust that holds the IRGC together. Because understanding the VSSL's history explains why it was chosen for this specific mission and why its cargo was disguised the way it was. The ship was built in Germany in 2009 as the E-Scan Britannia, a heavy lift cargo vessel with two powerful cranes mounted on its port side, designed specifically to move extremely heavy and oversized cargoes. That conventional shipping infrastructure cannot handle. It was renamed multiple times across its operational life, becoming the Hyundai Britannia, then EIT Palmina, then Sparta III, and finally Ursa Major in 2021. By the time it received its final name, it was owned and operated by Oberon Logistica, a Russian state corporation that handles marine military logistics. The company's name translates directly as Defense Logistics. This W is not a neutral commercial shipping operation. It was an instrument of the Russian Ministry of Defense as supply chain. The Ursa Major had spent years running what analysts called Russia's Syrian Express, the logistics route that supplied the Russian military's operations at the Tartus naval base in Syria, evacuating Russian military EQ, UIP when circumstances required it. This was a ship that knew how to move sensitive military cargo under commercial cover. It had been doing exactly that for years, and in December 2024, it was doing it again, on a mission whose stakes were categorically different from anything it had carried before. The departure sequence tells the first part of the story, and it tells it in the specific language of operational concealment that investigators trained to read these patterns can decode from the public RIO, CORD. On December 2nd, 2024, the Ursa Major docked at the Russian port of Ust-Luga in the Gulf of Finland, a fuel and industrial port that serves as a primary loading point for Russian military logistics vessels. It then moved to a container terminal in St. Petersburg. The public shipping manifest recorded the cargo as 2 large manhole covers, 129 empty shipping containers, and 2 large Liebherr cranes. The declared destination was Vladivostok, Russia's major Pacific port, located on the country's eastern coast. The ship departed St. Petersburg on December 11th. Now consider the route that declaration implied. A vessel leaving St. Petersburg bound for Vladivostok would travel west through the Baltic Sea, south through the English Channel, through the Strait of Gibraltar, across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, Ross, the Indian Ocean, and then north through the Pacific to Vladivostok. That route takes a vessel carrying Russian port cranes and empty containers through some of the most heavily monitored waters in the world, past the shores of NATO allies, through a choke point Contro, Iliad by Egypt, and across an ocean, before arriving at a destination that could have been reached far more directly and far more cheaply by rail across as Russia itself. The Trans-Siberian Railway connects St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. Cranes and empty containers can travel by train. The decision to ship them by sea along a route that passes through the Mediterranean requires an explanation that empty containers and port cranes cannot provide. Nuclear reactor housings being delivered to a port on the North Korean coast can. The specific cargo that investigators identified when they examined the loading footage and the physical evidence from the sinking was the VM-4SG nuclear reactor housing. Understanding what the VM-4SG is and what it does is essential for understanding why its transfer to North Korea represented something that analysts described as one of the most significant potential nuclear proliferation events in recent decades. The VM-4SG is a naval nuclear reactor, originally developed during the Soviet era for use in strategic nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. Specificus lie the Delta IV class. Delta IV submarines are SSBNs, nuclear-powered vessels carrying submarine-launched ballistic missiles. the kind of platform that sits at the core of a nuclear deterrent because it can hide beneath the ocean's surface for extended periods while remaining capable of launching nuclear warheads at targets thousands of kilometers away. The reactor that powers them is not an energy system in the civilian sense. It is the propulsion heart of one of the most strategically consequential weapons platforms ever built. The VM-4SG remains in service aboard several Russian Navy Delta IV submarines today. Investigators examining the photag of the Ursa Major's loading operations in Ust-Luga and the dimensions of the objects being placed in the ship's hold estimated the two large items at approximately 65 tons each. Standard MA and hull covers do not weigh 65 tons. VM-4SG nuclear reactor housings do, and the video footage showed containers being loaded into the hold with a deliberate gap left beneath the structures, later identified as those housings, a loading configuration that makes no sense for inert port equipment and considerable sense for objects requiring specific structural support and spacing. Greatest train robbery in history, the one where they stole the train. The mastermind was a London criminal named Bruce Reynolds. Reynolds had received information from an insider within Royal Mail itself, a senior security officer whose name has never been publicly confirmed to this day. The information concerned a specific carriage E attached to the Glasgow to London mail train called the High Value Package Carriage, abbreviated to HVP. This carriage was used to transport large quantities of cash sent between cities through the postal system. Reynolds learned two critical pieces of information from his insider. First, that on a specific night, the security alarm system normally installed in the HVP carriages would be absent. 3 HVP carriages had been fitted with alarms in 1961. On the night of the robbery, all 3 were out of service. A reserve carriage designated M30264M, which had no security system at all, would be used instead. Second, and more critically, the previous week had been a bank holiday weekend. This meant that the amount of cash in the carriage would not be the usual £300,000. It would be closer to £3 million, 12 times the normal amount. Both of these facts were not coincidences. They were the result of months of intelligence gathering by Reynolds and his team, who had been waiting for exactly this combination of circumstances. Reynolds assembled a team of more than 15 people. He brought in his own associates, experienced London criminals who knew how to plan and execute a large-scale operation without violence, but none of them had experienced robbing Bing trains. So he recruited a second gang called the South Coast Raiders, who did. The plan that emerged from these combined forces was meticulous. They would not simply board the train. They would stop it using a fake signal, separate the engine and first 2 carriages from the rest of the train, drive it to a bridge 1 kilometer away where their truck was waiting, unload the cash using a human chain in 15 minutes, and disappear before anyone knew what had happened. To drive the train, they brought a retired railway driver, and to stop it, they tampered with the signal at Brightigo Crossing, covering the green light with a glove and connecting a battery to operate the red light. The train stopped exactly as planned. The assistant driver climbed down to use the trackside telephone to contact the signal operator. The telephone line had been cut in advance. Before he could return to the engine, gang members emerged from the bushes and grabbed him. Others climbed both sides of the engine simultaneously. When Jack Mills resisted, one of the gangs struck him on the head with an iron bar. He lost consciousness at the controls. The front 2 carriages were uncoupled from the rest of the train. The retired driver, who was supposed to take the controls, looked at the unfamiliar engine and froze. He had never operated this particular type of locomotive before. The gang had to revive Mills at gunpoint and force the injured driver to move his own train 1 kilometer to the bridge. He complied. The train stopped at Brightigo Bridge. The truck was waiting below. The gang broke open the HVP carriage door. 5 postal staff inside were restrained, tied face down, and told not to move for 30 minutes. The bags were there, 128 of THEM. Their total weight was approximately 2.5 tons. The gang formed a human chain from the carriage down to the truck on the roadbed below the bridge. They had 15 minutes before the absence of the train would raise alarms. In 15 minutes, they loaded 120 bags into the truck. The remaining 8 were left behind because time ran out. Everything had worked exactly as planned. Almost. As the gang left, one member told the bound postal staff not to move for 30 minutes, or their lives would be at risk. That single statement was the mistake that undid everything. Police, when they arrived and heard this statement, calculated immediately that with a 30-minute head start, the gang could only be within a 50-kilometer radius of the robbery site. This gave investigators their search area. The Ganny G drove 43 kilometers to a farmhouse they had rented 3 months earlier in a village near Oakley. They arrived safely. They listened to police radio frequencies on a VHF receiver and heard that the robbery had been discovered. For a brief period, they were celebrating. They played Monopoly on the floor of the farmhouse using real banknotes from the robbery. When they heard on the radio that police were searching within a 50-kilometer radius, panic replaced celebration. They had planned to leave Sunday. They moved the departure to Friday. On Thursday, das kidnapping dissing. Hay divided the money. The total was approximately £2.5 million. Each major gang member received roughly £150,000, equivalent to millions in today's money. Before leaving, they wiped every surface in the farmhouse for fingerprints. One person was assigned to burn the farmhouse after everyone left. He took the money and left without burning it. A neighbor noticed unusual activity at the farmhouse on the morning of August 8th and reported it to police after seeing the reward announcement on television. Police raided the farmhouse and found empty mailbags, Royal Mail equipment, and a truck that had been hastily painted yellow. They also found the Monopoly board. The game had been played with real stolen banknotes, and several of the players had not wiped their fingerprints from the board before leaving. Every major gang member had a criminal record. The fingerprints matched within days. 14 of the 16 gang members were arrested. 2 were never identified. The Royal Mail security officer who had provided the original intelligence was never identified. The retired driver who was supposed to operate the train and whose real name nobody had established was never found. The court described the edit as the crime of the century and sentenced the convicted gang members to 30 years imprisonment. Jack Mills, who was struck on the head while doing his job driving a mail train, never drove it again. He died 7 years later. The bridge where the robbery took place is still known locally as Robbers Bridge. This is World Unveiled. Subscribe because the greatest heists in history are always the ones where the plan was perfect and one small thing was not. Peak or ridge at its summit, Mount Roraima does something that seems to violate every principle of natural geology. Its top is completely flat, an enormous, perfectly level plateau stretching across the very top of the mountain, permanently surrounded by clouds, perpetually shrouded in mist, sitting so high above the jungle below that it feels less like a part of the earth and more like a separate world floating somewhere between the ground and the sky. According to National Geographic researchers, Mount Roraima is over 2 billion years old, making it one of the oldest geological formations anywhere on the planet. For millions upon millions of years, no human being ever set foot on its summit. It was completely isolated from the rest of the world, its top hidden in clouds, its walls too steep and too sheer for any climber to scale. It was not until 1884 that a human being first successfully reached the summit, and when they did, what they found up there stunned the scientific world completely. The flat top of Mount Roraima is not barren rock. It is teeming with life, but life unlike anything found anywhere else on Earth. Researchers discovered animal and plant species on its summit that had never been seen before anywhere in the world. Of all the species found on Mount Roraima, 53% exist nowhere else on this planet. Not in the jungle below, not in any other mountain range, not in any laboratory or nature reserve. Only here, on this impossible flat-topped mountain, floating in the clouds above South America, has this life ever been found. Mount Roraima did not just evolve in isolation, it evolved into an entirely different world. Leaving South America behind, our journey now takes us to the waters between India and Sri Lanka. And here, visible even from NASA satellites orbiting hundreds of miles above the Earth, is one of the most controversial and mysterious structures ever discovered on our planet.